Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Oriental Despot. Today, we're going to be discussing the impact of coronavirus on India. On the one hand, the Modi BJP government in Delhi is being widely criticized for incompetence and brutality, particularly against the poorest and the most vulnerable. On the other hand, the state government of Kerala, under the leadership of Pinarayi Vijayan and the Communist Party of India Marxist, the CPIM, has been praised for handling this crisis better than any other state in the Indian Union. Beyond this latest health crisis, the BJP has been criticized for pushing a divisive agenda, one that ultimately aims to strip countless Indians of their citizenship, trampling on the rights of Kashmiris, and more generally serving the interests of corporations and elites, while cozying up to the United States, all but abandoning India's older reputation as an independent post-colonial nation. You may be thinking, aren't they just your criticisms, Jay? And you'd be absolutely right. But I don't know anywhere near as much as my next guest, who is Anish Radhakrishnan, a journalist for People's Dispatch. You can find them at peoplesdispatch.org. Anish, good to see you.
Likewise. That was a very good summary of what happened in the last few months. Even I would do that.
Thank you. Because, I mean, India's been... I've been following India for the entirety of my. I've been following India for the entirety of my political life, and it just seems like over the past year things have just gotten worse and worse. Over the past month, we've seen two very different responses to the coronavirus. How would you describe the manner in which the centre has handled the situation?
I would say it's to put it into words, it would be just utter carelessness, because the government had all the necessary warnings from the get-go when the first cases arrived in, I think, mid-February, and it was very clear that there were certain things that the government could have done, and which is entirely under its jurisdiction to do. No other state governments can do that, which was to restrict incoming travel and outgoing travel from other countries, especially places where you have the spread happening. And we could have done that when we only had just 3 coronavirus cases. And but nothing of that sort was done. The ruling party was more interested in something else at that point. As you know, in February we had a mass riot, what we call the communal riot, or what we would call a sectarian riot, in the capital, right in the middle of the capital. And dozens of people died because of that. There were hundreds of them who were displaced, and just a month later, we also had this event where a state government was deposed. Basically, what they did was they just encouraged a group of people, a group of legislators in the Madhya Pradesh State Assembly or the state legislature to jump ship to the other side and it brought down one of the biggest states that is run by an opposition party, which was Madhya Pradesh. And so that is what the BJP has been more concerned about, more interested in. They were more interested in doing these kind of things. They even sanctioned a proposed new parliament building in the middle of the capital, which could actually go to, I don't know, maybe billions of rupees, and there's no reason why it is to be done.
Yeah, and the other thing is that oil prices have plummeted, which means that the Indian government would have a mini fiscal bonanza at this point in time, which means that they do have the money to spend on dealing with the public health crisis that is coronavirus.
Yeah, exactly. They actually did. In fact, the estimates range from, so I'm talking in Indian figures. I don't know. It could be, so
use lakhs and crores, that's fine. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's something around 1 lakh crore. And that's a huge sum of money. 1 lakh crore would, I think, translate to about, $44 billion. And that is the turnout. It's also because the government did not really bring down the prices. They actually added more tariffs to oil imports. And that gave them a lot in a span of month, actually, that brought in billions of dollars in revenue to the government. So they actually do have a lot of resources at their hand. And it's just like utter chaos because you can actually see the way the government is doing certain things. I'm not going to deny that it has done it hasn't done anything but the thing is that it's not enough. Many of these policies have come very late, and often it has just been reacting to smaller crises. So you had the issue of matter of people being evicted from their homes. Many of the migrant laborers. One of the reasons you must have come across
a lot
of pictures where thousands of migrant workers from major cities were walking miles and miles to just go back home. And a part of that had to do with the fact that they were not getting any wages in the cities. They had no other means to sustain themselves. And and more importantly, many of them were actually kicked out of their places because they didn't have the rent money to pay the rent. That itself, and now very recently, I think about 2 days ago, when Monday the government announced that it is going to freeze all rents beginning from April for the next month at least. So, and all evictions. Now,
but these people have already been evicted. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people.
Exactly.
I mean, what are the numbers? Do we know? Do we know the numbers that are leaving the cities for the countryside in North India?
So there are no numbers right now because a lot of times what they're trying to do is they're not just not counting the number of people that are now moving. The idea is that it's entirely under shutdown. There is no transportation. All the railway lines are closed down. Bus networks are closed down. So nobody's moving is the government's official stance. So when that happens, it really doesn't count what is going to happen, like the actual movement of people with in a long distance travel. So that is not being kept. But at any given day, it's pretty much like we can say something thousands, tens of thousands, if not lakhs, like hundreds of thousands, but tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So that's how we can easily say that. It's because that's in Delhi itself, there was this incident in Ashok Vihar where you had about 10,000 migrant workers just waiting for the bus. Now that is just one city we're talking about, one major city. There are workers from Mumbai, Hyderabad, Kerala, Chennai, all of these places trying to get out of the state and go back home. One of the reasons they want to go back home is they might have some means of sustenance. And they will have their families to support them. Gotcha. Many of them are quite young as well. Like they might be younger than you and me, actually. They're like 18, 19, 20, maybe even minors, like 15, 16-year-olds. And it's not uncommon. And so we are looking, so this crisis actually happened. It unfolded in a very dramatic way you can think of. And every state was actually just, trying to blame the other one, trying to not take responsibility. And then this government comes up with the enlightened policy of freezing rent and evictions. But even that, that is being done like in a different time. Like the time period, it begins today, April the 1st. That is when the policy would come to effect. Where you can't actually and you have to understand that it was not just the migrant workers. The actual reason, many have speculated, reason why this policy was made necessary was because a lot of doctors, medical professionals, and frontline workers, healthcare workers, were being evicted for no good reason. They were considered to be, carrying the plague, basically. And so many housing societies actually passed regulations where they just kicked tenants out, anybody who was working in the healthcare sector. Not necessarily ones who are dealing with the epidemic at the moment. It's just anybody who's a doctor, nurse, any ASHA worker, and that actually prompted the government to take a
So,
step.
so they're taking out the workforce that's actually needed to deal with the pandemic. That's
Yeah,
insane.
exactly.
That's completely insane. You know what else is insane, right? I remember because the first bit of news that made me really worried about the way Modi and the BJP was handling this whole thing was the whole clanging utensils thing. What was that about? Like, it was this weird thing where Modi was like, he was like trying to inspire people to withstand the difficulties that would come with coronavirus, and he said, "Clang your utensils." Like, what was that about?
Well, you have to give it to the man that he's very good at theatrics and coming up with certain things. Like it's
He
just
is, but people are impressed by
he
that
has
shit. Really, like,
a couple of people, like especially when you're looking at in north of India, like many were just impressed because nobody else was doing anything. So this was like something.
yeah, I saw this
Like
one
from
guy. I think I saw this one video of this guy just smashing his head with like one of those steel plates, and
Yeah, you should have been here. Actually, it was a complete cacophony of just people trying to whistle, bang their utensils, bang their pots, even gas cylinders. I've seen videos of people just taking out their empty gas cylinders and banging on it. The thing was that he gave a very dramatic announcement when the actual the spread was increasing. There were like hundreds of cases, and he made this very dramatic announcement. He does this thing where he says that at 8 p.m. he would make an announcement, and he
right,
did this. He just said that like something that your employers would actually send you over an email saying like wash your hands, please be indoors, do not practice social distancing, stuff like that. That is what he was trying to tell over a dramatic announcement of half an hour. And in the middle of that, he inserted this one thing where he asked people to come out of their house, stand in their balconies, and clap or
bang
bang
your
your
utensils. Yeah.
yeah, to thank the health workers who are on the front lines right now
Oh, so
fighting for
that's what it
it.
was about, right? So the
Yeah,
health
so
workers who have been taken out of the labor force, to thank them. So
yeah,
it's a
so
complete
it was
mess.
basically something. I think he found something from Italy where there were people who were singing for health workers from from their balconies and from
Yeah,
their houses, from their windows, and that's something that he just took and like that was a pastime for them. People
yeah.
just spontaneously. But here you have one person just directing millions, telling them to do what they should be doing.
Right, right. There's been a major lack of social spending. So I was looking at the numbers, okay, and this is where Kerala comes into the equation. So in Kerala, they spent, from what I can see, 20,000 crores on dealing with this epidemic and pandemic rather, and that amounts to 58,800 rupees per Keralite. Now, the central government has spent 22 billion US dollars. Now, I know I'm using different like figures here, but the per capita there is 1,200 per Indian. So the central government 1,200 per Indian, the Kerala government 58,800 per Indian. Now, how is it that the central government can't find the funds? What's the rationale behind this? Is it just stinginess, or they're worried about about capital flight? What's going on here?
It's not very clear actually, because you have to understand that this is the most opaque government that India has ever come across in the center, in the union. Yeah, this government does not do press conferences. It does not take journalists who they will find rather unwieldy in press conferences. If it does, they just censor the kind of journalist that comes into the into the parliament or
It's like an elected dictatorship then.
Yeah, exactly. So you have a prime minister that never talks to anybody, that never takes questions, and then the ministers who do much of the work, but even they are more or less just absent. And it's not it's not a government that actually communicates. You have to compare that with, say, the Kerala government, and not just Kerala government, many other state governments. I shouldn't be just talking about Kerala, but in specifically Kerala government, which has had this policy of having one press conference every day. Like the chief minister sits with journalists talking about everything that has happened that day, every measure that has been taken by the government, every time he's in Kerala. And that was continued with the coronavirus. It just became a routine where by every evening, 7 o'clock, you will have the prior chief minister sitting with the health minister and somebody else from his cabinet talking about giving you updates, giving you the number of cases, the recoveries, what medicines have been given, all of that. So you have to understand, like when you ask a question like, what is happening with the government? We really do not know. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Literally nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah.
What is going through their head? What is their rationale for not taking timely decisions? It's not at all very clear. What you can see is a government that is highly unprepared to deal with the situation that India is right now facing. And that shows in the utter lack of social spending. That is where the carelessness comes, because they just began these kind of spending, even the $22-23 billion that they spent on specifically for Corona, that they have called PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, which is basically poor welfare fund. That is what it means, and that is their vehicle to fund for coronavirus anti-epidemic measures right now. And in that, it just came so late, and it was still not enough, because some of those measures, if you look at it, and John Grace has written about it. He's an anarchist economist, but Belgian person who works in
friend of Amartya Sen's, I believe.
Amartya Sen,
they used to collaborate with each other.
Yeah. But he has actually pointed out that some of those schemes that they talked about, including increase in daily wage payments or hourly wage payments for the people who are employed in the government's unemployment guarantee scheme. All of that was something that just was supposed to happen anyway by the budget year. Yeah. These were suggestions that were already given by different states, and it's just the same figures. They just implemented it, and it wasn't something like specifically for to deal with the coronavirus. And it's very, very less for anybody to actually sustain. Look at the fact that it's people are given, like women, for instance, are specifically targeted. Working class or poor women, women who are into agricultural labor, mostly unpaid, very often, they are given 500 rupees through the scheme. 500 rupees per month, and 500 rupees for, say, like if she is only if she is the prime breadwinner of the
like a daily menial worker in Kerala gets that in a day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so 500 rupees a month, that is their social security program right now. Right. And it's only if that person is the prime breadwinner of the family. And you have to understand that that's very lacking. You're talking about a family of, say, 4. That is the government estimate of what a family constitutes. Often that's not just 4, it's more than 4. And you have to sustain family of, say, 5-7 people on 500 rupees, which I don't know how much it comes to, like $10.
$10, yeah, $10 a month.
$10 a month, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's how lacking this policy is right now. They have done certain other things, which is to open ration shops and release food grains that we have had, but they're still not doing it on a universal level. They're still trying to target.
Because I think, like, what I know about the public distribution system is that, like, it's been gutted over the past 20 years under both governments, under both, like, Congress and the BJP. And the only place that it still has the ability to provide food grains to, like, let's say the majority of the population is probably Kerala. Is that correct? Or are there other states that have a decent public distribution system as well?
There are other states who are a decent public distribution system. Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra are among those.
Okay.
It's not, but the problem is much bigger. The funding for the delivery system is very terrible, and we also do not have a policy of reserve grains and we get like millions of tons of grains every year in storage, and most of that just rots away. It is never released into the market.
Why?
And we are a
Is it
country.
is it to keep prices up or?
We're not. No, that is one theory, but still doesn't make sense because keeping prices up and doesn't really benefit anybody.
Yeah, it just
at
has a
that.
feed-on effect. It just ends up making
Exactly.
everything else more expensive. If you want industrial growth, you got to make sure that grain, particularly the staples like rice and wheat, are as cheap as possible. So,
Exactly, and
yeah.
it's just a complete lack of policy when it comes to these things. They do not have a policy of like, okay, we have a certain amount of grains left over from say the last harvest season. You can redistribute it or release at least half the stock to the market. We pay money, our taxpayers' money go into paying for those go downs, for the rent of those go downs, for the maintenance of that, and even that is not done very well. Most of that rots away, and that is where, like currently, when you have, various left groups in the country talking about releasing those grains, they are still not doing it in a very efficient manner. They're still only trying to target the BPL families, which is below poverty line families,
Yeah.
those with those cards. And those documentations are also very hard to get in many places. Not only that, there's no system to actually get people to, or get the system to actually deliver food at home. And that is
BPL,
more
by the way,
important.
BPL for anyone who's watching is below poverty line. So India has different kind of levels of poverty, and if you qualify for BPL, then you're entitled to a ration. But as Anish is saying, it's difficult to get those rations anyway.
Yeah, so you do not have a very efficient system. If it was a universal thing, then that would make more sense. Like in Kerala right now, where those who really need the grains can actually go without having to bother about bringing the right documents. And that is where you can deal with that. The rich or the better off will not really come to a ration shop or a public distribution
Yeah,
outlet to get those grains and whatever they need. They're going to go to a supermarket or get it delivered at their home.
yeah.
But for the rest, it's going to be very difficult. And we do have enough grains. We have to understand we have grains in reserve that comes to around 54 kilos per person. And that is the amount of reserves that we have in India, 54 kilo per person for every bloody Indian. We're talking about 1.3 billion Indians. And that's a huge number of reserves that we have, and we are not releasing it. The central government has most of it. And that shows you how unprepared they are. They really just do not have any planning whatsoever.
Yeah, I remember when I was studying India back for during my masters, I did a dissertation on India's economic history. And one of the things that I found quite fascinating is that during the days of the so-called license Raj, people look back at the license Raj and they think, oh, it was terrible, it was too bureaucratic, it didn't work, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of that's true, right? So, for example, if you're restricting the imports of capital equipment because you think it's luxury consumer expenditure, then that's not a smart move, right? And we get that. But one of the good things about License Raj is that it prevented the top 10% of India's population from being able to import whatever they wanted from overseas, which then had the effect of devaluing the Indian currency. And the only way then to defend the value of the Indian currency was to export something to the rest of the world in return. And that's when India's agrarian system started to be reconfigured to be recreated in the image of foreign purchasing power. So that's when you started to see rice fields and wheat crops being transitioned into the production of cash crops and things like that. And so when I hear, for example, that the go downs are full, they're not being released, they're actually rotting, I think about this scenario because maybe the purpose there is because if the government thinks, you know what, suddenly the balance of payment situation is going out of control, we have to have an export drive in order to restore faith in the currency. And I think that's actually the kind of thinking that's driving these insane policies.
Yeah, but it still doesn't make sense because your balance of payment is going to be fucked anyway by the end of this 21-day lockdown. You're not
Yeah.
having any production being done, and apart from what is to be sustained, that is government policy right now.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make any sense to try to hold stuff and try to still insist on an export
It doesn't make
center.
sense. It doesn't make sense for another reason as well, because um, if you allow food prices to go up, then that's just going to make everything else more expensive, which is then going to cause inflation, and then the elites, because it's relatively free market, they're going to pull their money out of India anyway because of the inflation in order to escape the inflation. This is the point that Prabhat Patnaik has been making as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just Prabhat Patnaik. Even the staunchest of free market advocates in this country are now making the same point,
Really?
because that is how bad things are right now. We have already looked at an economy that was slowing down, and from that you're looking at an economy that is not producing anything. At
Yeah.
least for the last week, there has been no production whatsoever, almost zero. You can talk about.
Yeah.
So this is not going. You are going to have a very terrible economic crisis in the future. You can take measures though to actually better, keep people alive, so to say. Like basically, if you're going to let people die of hunger, or going to cultivating such shady things as akri, which is one of those weeds that grow with wheat, and which is actually poisonous, even hazardous for people to consume, and people are now starting to use that as a replacement for dal right now because they can't really get food grains in UP.
Oh my God.
I'm
Yeah.
giving giving you this as an example. This was a banned weed for cultivation, and the Modi government actually took out the ban in 2016 or 17, if I'm not wrong. And this thing is now, and the reason why it was banned in the first place is because there was a higher incidence of paralysis for paralysis cases on people who consume it, and that or stunted growth for children and other problems. And this was like a very evident thing. You're not supposed to consume it in huge quantities, but if you're going to replace a major protein source with that thing at a time of a crisis like this is going to be a disaster in waiting. So it's
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
better you actually create systems. And you have to say, like, it's the central government's inaction is quite jarring, not just in against, say, the model that is right now in place in Kerala, but also in certain states that are ruled by the BJP itself. Like in Uttarakhand, they are looking at, they have actually created a system where you will get your grains and ration home delivered by the government. And so that is done by a BJP government. It's like it's not an impossible thing to do, just that they're not doing it.
What I really worry about is that India, by having this lockdown, but without having the social spending that you need to make the lockdown effective, they're actually just going to kill more people. That more people are actually going to die because of illnesses brought about
That
because
has actually already
it's already happened.
right
People
now.
are starving.
Not just starving. So many, I think around 8 or 9 people have died in this journey back home on foot because of exhaustion and starvation.
Oh my God.
And there are, yeah, so we are already looking at figures that are at par with the COVID-19 deaths. So I don't know, like this disaster that is waiting to happen is not just the infection spreading or becoming endemic in India. It's just also the fact that you're going to have a system that is going to actively just kill people because they lack basic needs to survive, basic, facilities.
Because the thing is, in a situation like coronavirus, what you need to do is you need to be able to obviously have a lockdown, but then you have to have income replacement. You have to be able to essentially transfer wealth from those who have money to those who don't have money. That's the only way you can do it. There has to be that transfer of wealth.
It's I mean, like, you don't have to do the transfer of wealth right now, the redistribution. That is one of the first things that many economists have pointed out. The fact that we actually do have the money to spend. A lot of one
true,
of the
yeah.
first So one of the first things is that you can just tap some of the losses that happen during transmission and the redistribution, and that will take give an increase of about 10-15% in any case. And you can actually just spend the money that that you have earmarked in the budget. Now that has already happened. There is a plenty, and that often doesn't get spent. One of the reasons we have to understand about the the failing social security system in India is that the money that has been earmarked for many of the social spending is never spent. Like most of it never gets spent. Especially if you're it's also something that correlates to your caste and social position in the society. So if you're an Adivasi, the budget that is given for the scheduled tribes, which are Adivasis, or the indigenous people in India, that barely like 20-30% of that budget gets spent every year. And that shows you how, so you can actually create a system that works on war footing. It's not very difficult. Our bureaucracy is actually quite efficient to do that. You can use your emergency power. You can actually take in all the parties. There are measures that can be done.
Yeah.
People have come to them actually.
See, this is why I think it's more a matter of malice than incompetence. Did you see the controversy about how in UP people were being sprayed with bleach?
Yeah. It was liquid bleach with water, but still, it was. And even they were not even informed that they were being sanitized. They were just kept in the middle of the road, huddled together, and they were just sprayed with it. And it was like some of those. Sort of expect at some level that this is something. It's not surprising coming from the kind of government that we have in power in UP, especially, but at the same time, it was so shocking because, who does that? Just like that was the first question that came to my mind.
Well, what happened after that is that people started drawing comparisons to Kerala because there was video footage coming out of Kerala showing police officers essentially fumigating people who had come across the border. And then apparently there's a difference in the chemical, first of all. So the one used in Kerala is calcium hypochlorite, whereas the one used in UP is sodium hypochlorite. I don't know the difference between the two, but there's a huge difference in terms of...
It was not even that.
What is it?
It was not even that, actually. So I think, if I'm not wrong, calcium hypochlorite is basically bleach, the bleach powder that we use. But it was not that. The Kerala authorities actually corrected the news report saying that it was soap water.
Oh, right.
Because soap is the most effective thing, right?
Yeah.
If you want to disinfect people, soap is the most effective thing. You can't put bleach on people. That only works on surface.
Yeah.
Like hard surface. You can't use it on human beings. So soap is the most effective.
It's bad for you, right? Like you're not supposed to have it on your skin, and then you see this footage coming out of UP, and they're just spraying. They're just drenched wet at the end of that. I mean, they've got no towels. They've got no way of getting dry, and I'm guessing they've got like kilometers to walk after being drenched like that. I mean, it was just dehumanizing. And then I look at that and I think, I don't know. It's just me. Or there's no way Malayalis would put up with being treated that way. I don't think.
I don't think anybody would. But it's a point of. But you're not even told, right? These people were not even told. In Kerala, what happens is that you're told that your cars, your vehicles, you have to be sanitized before you enter the border. That is one thing that they did in Wayanad, where many people were coming in from Karnataka, returning to Kerala. And they were told that they will be sanitized before they go in because that's necessary. And I mean, at least a warning you should give them. You don't huddle people up in a group, to tell them to sit in the middle of the road, and then you spray something that they don't even know, and then when their eyes start itching and they start suffocating. And what is to say that, it is good, fortunately for the authorities or the people present there who are doing that, people did not riot. I mean, like otherwise, but then because these people were just very desperate to get back home, it was a different question altogether. But it was a very I don't know. It's something that is still very terrible. And as you mentioned, that some of the mainstream media personalities started sharing the Kerala picture, the video,
Yeah,
as
and
something
saying,
very similar to.
see, it's the same
Yeah,
thing,
and
you
the
know,
and the,
like,
fu-
yeah.
but the
Why is the
funny
BJP
fact
being
is that
persecuted, you know?
yeah, but the funny fact is that he was not trying to point fingers at the left government in Kerala. They could have very easily done that if they wanted to. The whole point was to say that it's a common practice. Why are you so
Yeah,
angry?
yeah.
As if it's something normal to actually pour bleach on human beings. Yeah, so yeah, you're right, completely right, because in the sense that they have been desensitized to their own oppression to a great extent. They have been dispossessed to the point where they have nothing, basically. In many cases, they literally have nothing. These are people who live hand to mouth. They are daily wage workers. These are people who buy their ration or the things that they need to eat that day on a day-to-day basis, depending on how much money they have. So I mean, like, can't really blame them for not fighting back because they just do not know what is going to come after that,
Yeah.
and it is just something very different. It would be very different because for anybody else, because for people like you and me, or somebody like me, for instance, if I ended up tomorrow because 2 months of salary missed, and I would be in the same position as those
Well,
people
all
as
you'd have
well.
to do is speak English and they wouldn't do that to you.
Yeah, exactly. Or one of that is one of the, and you have to know, you must know that people are still coming back from other countries. Indians who are given, the government sent special chartered flights to Italy, to the Gulf, to places where Indians are stranded to bring them back home. And none of them are asked even to wash their hands, much less be sprayed by bleach
Yeah,
water in the
and that's the
in the airport.
craziest
I mean,
thing because like the COVID-19 is an airport disease. You know what I mean?
exactly.
A
Like, reasons
virus,
why I
right?
didn't want.
Yeah.
Exactly. One of the reasons why I didn't want to go home was because I was afraid that going back home, I might just become a carrier inadvertently. And that actually happened. So in JNU, for instance, there were 12 students who were going back home to Kerala, and they were tested, and because they were all in the same plane as somebody who was tested positive of COVID-19. And so they all became a cluster. They all
Right.
became part of the cluster. They were going back home before the curfew. I think a day before the curfew began in
Plus,
India.
you
And
can be asymptomatic, you know, for like
exactly
2 or 3 weeks
20
or something.
days. Yeah, exactly. And it's going to be even more dangerous for people who are older, like my mother,
Yeah.
who has to deal with certain issues like hormonal diseases, autoimmune diseases that she has to deal with, and that can be much more dangerous for her than me. For me, it might just be a cold and it might go away, but for them, like, that's a different. So yeah, that is one of the reasons why airports were the first things that everybody was asking to be closed down, because that is where you get all these clusters from.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is still not being done. On the other hand, you had trains being closed down, you had buses being closed down. You don't have interstate buses now. You do not. You have roads being blocked, people being beaten for just walking on the road, and at the same time, they're saying that there's no community spread.
Oh, there's insane levels of police brutality all over North India. Like,
Exactly,
yeah, I mean,
and it's
people who live hand to mouth, if they don't have income replacement and you're asking them to stay at home, you're asking them to starve. Like, we're in a privileged
exactly.
position where the only issue I have to care about is getting bored, right? Because I can't go out. These people are worried about starving. And the thing is, they might not even have a home to go to, especially if they're being kicked out because they can't pay the
Yeah.
rent.
And the police is doing such absurd shit. They are confiscating or just dumping food grains, vegetable carts that are coming over. They're just destroying the essentials that needs to be.
See, this is social Darwinism, right? This is like, I think
Exactly.
they're being just paid to screw things up and screw over the poor.
Exactly. I mean, like and most state governments. So it happened in Kerala as well. We can't. But when it happened, the government actually passed strict orders saying that if, even the superior officer will be responsible for any kind of violence on their part, on the part
Okay.
of the constables or police officer. So they will be kicked out and suspended if they do if they pull out that kind of shit. Most
Yeah.
other places, nothing of that sort has been done.
And the thing is,
Police
when
is
yeah, when you have like large numbers of migrant workers who are trying to leave Delhi and they're bunched together in these large crowds, how is that compatible with social distancing? Like, it's not. Like, on the
exactly.
one hand, you're saying social distancing, and then you're bunching them together. And the cops are like beating them and like herding them into like this small area so the roads are free. And like the transport's all shut down, so how are they going to get anywhere? Like, this would actually be an ideal situation in which to send in the army, because I mean, India. I'm sure the Indian military's got all kinds of cool shit that they'd be able to lend, but it seems like they're completely preoccupied with treating Kashmiris like garbage. I actually think that the BJP's fundamental ideology is social Darwinism. They look at India, they see the vast masses of poor people in India, and they think, you know what, wouldn't it be great if we could kill them off? you know, I actually think they have that level of hatred in them because I
Uh,
mean, India is a caste
I,
society, right? You've got like a set of elite castes that essentially dominate politics, and they look upon those who are outside their tribe as essentially expendable.
I wouldn't disagree with that because that's actually quite true with much of the middle class or the so-called middle class and the better off in India actually think. I have actually heard somebody say that like this person just wished that there be a massive plague or something and that kills off all the poor in India and they
Yeah, a
can
lot
just
of
live.
people say that in the name of the environment as well. It's like this
Yeah,
crazy
so
eco-fascist thing where,
exactly.
yeah,
So it's something, and that is one of the reasons. I mean, and these are the people who actually form the core vote base or the core constituency of the BJP.
yeah.
The BJP cannot at the moment be explicitly that Darwinian or Malthusian, but
But they are though. That's like they're
but yeah, the
pissing on their
indifference comes
supporters.
out of it. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. The indifference stems from that. I would definitely say that because they really do not care about the poor. They just have to show that they're pro-poor to win elections. Because that is one way. You cannot just win by the votes of the elite who barely vote in this country. It's the poor who vote in this country,
Elites
and
don't vote.
that
That's
yeah, so
interesting.
so the better you are in the class position, your voter participation comes down. That has been like a very common thing in Indian politics since beginning. So you
Interesting.
actually, at least since the last 40 years,
Yeah, I
since
guess
the
that
80s.
makes sense. I mean, if you want to vote in India, you got to wait in line for like how long? Like, I don't know, like half an hour, an hour.
Not half an hour, maybe sometime 2 hours even,
Jesus
depending on
Christ.
the place that you're voting in.
Yeah.
So yeah, so people do that actually, and you have to you can actually see the places that actually have low voter turnouts. Mumbai, for instance, have less than half the people voting. So that
Right.
shows you.
Right.
Yeah, but in rural Maharashtra, for instance, say somewhere in Vidarbha, which is affected by farmer suicide, which has droughts every year, which has food shortages very often, high child malnutrition rates, all of that has one of the highest voter percentages. It's a very common phenomenon. So if you
Yeah.
have to win elections in India, you have to at least pretend to be you're a welfarist.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah, you got to pretend like you care about the poor, basically. That's the only way, because they're the
exactly.
ones that end up voting in large numbers. Which brings me to another question. Do you think this is going to hurt the BJP's chances in the next election? I mean, it is a while away. It's in 2024.
So I have to point out that since 2019, when the last general election that happened last year, and they won with a increased majority,
Yeah, that was
uh,
insane.
they, yeah, they have won only one state assembly election, and even that only happened because there was some minor party
That's
that
telling. Yeah.
that emerged as a third party and cut off Congress's
At the
votes.
state level, the BJP is being rejected, it seems.
Exactly, everywhere. You can actually think of like Jharkhand, they lost Maharashtra, even though they came like were the largest party. They did not get the support of their major ally, which was Shiv Sena, who went with the Congress and created a government of its own. It got sidelined there. It lost. It almost lost Haryana if it wasn't for that one regional party that was there. And so you can actually see that, and it's slated to lose a lot of other states in the coming elections. And this was before this crisis even panned out. We have to understand that. So you're looking at a situation where the government uh, is losing a lot of legitimacy in the eyes of the people, and that's very clearly visible right now. Because nothing, I mean, and this is not just the government's. I mean, like this is like saying, like in the times of crisis, all the contradictions are sharpened, right?
Yeah.
So it's the inefficiency and the, as you say, like the complete malice of the government in dealing with the country dispossessed is for everyone to see. And but you know what? I would still not take the leap and say that it will affect their chances in the elections because, as you said, it's about 4 years later, and we still have a long way to go. And often now, recently, people have this new tendency of voting differently in state and national elections. They voted very differently in Delhi. You can see that, and so it's not. It won't be impossible for BJP to come back in power in 2024 with even greater majority if there's no real opposition to offer as a national.
That's the big issue. Yeah, I mean, there is like, who's the opposition, right? Like, I mean, I'm hoping that the Congress Party collapses and the CPIM emerges as like the major opposition. But if are there any hopefuls in the CPIM? So Hindi speakers who can appeal to that vast like the population bulk in North India, right? The Hindi belters.
Yeah. So here's the thing with the way that different parties work. So in one of the cases with CPIM is that it really doesn't work with this, popular leader than the party framework, So you won't. So the party doesn't create these popular leaders. It just becomes a popular party. That's how it wins elections often. Be it in Kerala, in Bengal, in Tripura, the places where they have created governments, that have ruled for much longer and created alternative models of development in different ways. And in these cases, except for maybe like Jyoti Basu is the one that comes closest, who was the chief minister for 21 years.
West Bengal.
In West Bengal. Yeah. And he was the only one who was like the most popular leader that we have created. And even that was limited because he was still part, who was somebody seen as to be dictated by the discipline of the party. So the party's organization really does not create that sort of, this popular leadership narrative.
Right.
It just create these great men. The point is to create a mass of, party workers, cadre, and that is how we see the left try to create, a popular base for itself. So you can actually see the way the left functions. It primarily tries to not go by this whole popular leader strategy, because the point is to create a mass base that will back it no matter who comes to power. The point is because a popular leader can actually hold the party to ransom, right? You can actually, or even if that doesn't happen, it can actually create a system where politicians are rewarded over the ones who actually drive the mass of the party, which are trade unionists and peasant organizers and feminists who actually create the bulk of the party's masses and cadre base. And that cannot be replaced in that sense, because if you're running a communist party in a liberal electoral democracy, you can't have careerist politicians running the party in that sense.
Yeah. You were mentioning before about how it's the poor that vote, it's the working class that vote, it's the middle class and the elites who generally don't vote. I remember reading a book a long time ago. It's Everybody Loves a Good Drought by Balagumi Sainath, right? Yeah, P. Sainath. And I remember him mentioning that in 1996, the elites in Mumbai actually petitioned the courts to strip the poor of their voting rights if they lived in slums. Do you know about this?
This whole thing about encroachment. So the encroachers are not. So what they try to do is, you have to be a resident, for instance. I have to point that out. You have to be a resident of the constituency to vote in that constituency.
Yep.
So an encroacher does not become a resident. That is what they wanted to make it out as, like to disenfranchise the poor by making the so-called encroachers or the slum dwellers non-residents, because the residents are not legal or legally sanctioned. And I can't remember the book now, but the point was, the actual thing that happened was the courts not only rejected that, the government at that point, it was led by Shiv Sena, actually created, established a law that sanctioned slums as legal slums. There are now slums in Mumbai that are legally recognized.
Oh, right. So Shiv Sena has a history of actually siding with the slum dwellers in conflicts with the elite.
Because their cadre, because their cadre comes from that.
Oh, they're all those sons of the soil. Yeah.
Yeah, basically that. So people who were dispossessed by the complete deindustrialization of Mumbai. So Mumbai had a massive industrial unit. The textile industry, for instance, was one of the biggest in the world till the 70s. And when that collapsed, and it just completely collapsed, a large number of these workers were dispossessed. And they were the ones and their residents and their settlements became the slums that we know today.
Okay.
And these are the people who now vote for Shiv Sena. And because Shiv Sena is a cadre-based party, we have to understand that. It's unlike BJP, which is runs like any other party around the world, where you have careerist politicians running the ship. Shiv Sena is run by a lot of these cadre-based lot who run.
So it has some similarities with the CPIM in Kerala in that sense.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's a cadre-based party.
Yeah, like this. In fact, it was created to fight the communists. So it was made into a very fascist mirror.
Well, that's what fascists do. Fascists are always just like ripping off communist ideas of organization and style, of course, right? So, it's interesting. But how have they responded to this, to the coronavirus situation, Shiv Sena?
So one of the things that the government, so the chief minister right now, Uddhav Thackeray, who's the son of the founder of
Bal Thackeray,
Bal Thackeray, and he is actually holding daily broadcasts and almost weekly press conferences, giving updates about the thing. Uddhav Thackeray has actually sanctioned funds to increase testing in Maharashtra. So on the per capita basis, Maharashtra, even though it comes second in terms of testing, number of tests that have been done and screening that has happened in India, it is still on per capita basis very far behind. And because of that, the point is that you have to actually increase testing, speed up testing, so that cases, if they reach the slums, say of slums in Mumbai, it is going to be a catastrophe. And that is something that needs to be contained. There has been proactive measures taken by the state government, including, and I have to point this out, including trying to coordinate with other states for the transportation of migrant workers who are people from UP and Bihar.
Yeah.
I mean, like the same people they wanted to beat the shit out of
That's right. Yeah.
barely like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And who,
Yeah.
and they created this whole xenophobic narrative against the UP Bhaiya and the Bihari Bhaiya. And,
Yeah.
I mean, like they were famous for that, and their whole bench,
Yeah, because
their whole USP
they're a
was anti-migrant.
nativist. Yeah, they're a
Exactly.
nativist Maharashtrian first party, and they don't like
Exactly.
outsiders. And they've shifted from hating South Indians to hating North Indians to hating. I mean, of course, they hate Muslims, right? I mean, that's like a given
Yeah.
because they're a Hindu nationalist party.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this.
That is so
yeah. Go ahead.
if they are doing something like that, that shows the direness of the situation and something that actually has dawned on them. Now, Maharashtra, I think, leads in the number of coronavirus cases, but that's also because they've started stepping up the testing of people who are coming in from other countries, especially from the Persian Gulf region and Europe. And they have also started testing and trying to track down people who are suspects, their contacts, including their maids and help that actually come to their houses to work, and that has been done, if not nowhere close to the efficiency that has been done, that has come in Kerala. But you can actually see that Shiv Sena is doing a lot more than
They're doing what a
anybody
national government should do, basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, or yeah. But speaking of Kerala, okay, so this is like the we've talked about the bad. We've talked about the BJP, the way they've totally screwed it up. They are responsible for immiserating millions of people by not providing income support. People have died as a direct result of their policies. But then we head down to the South Indian state of Kerala, also known as the People's Republic of Kerala. A state that I was born in, state that you were born in. You were born in Kerala, right?
No, Mumbai.
Mumbai, but you're okay. So I was born in Kerala and you weren't. But you speak Malayalam a lot better than I do, so my Malayalam is garbage. Could you give us a summary of how Kerala has handled the situation?
Well, summary will be a little difficult because the kind of things that they've done is something that nobody even thought of, actually.
Okay.
That state governments could do, including income support, including delivery for quarantined and suspected people, and including job creation. They've started producing hand sanitizers and clinical masks and all of that by roping in volunteers and even giving prisoners in Kerala's prisons the normal wage, or the market rate of their wages, and getting them into the production line. All of that, like it's an interesting. Even they have even started producing ventilators, because Kerala has a total of 5,000 ICUs and ventilators of all its hospitals.
Gotcha.
So it really so if the situation becomes terrible, the government is actually taking a very foresight, with great foresight, it has actually taken measures to amp up the production of necessary medical equipment, and that is something that you do not have anywhere else right now. And this shows the meticulous planning with which they have been working, and with which they have been running the state for the last 4 years. Even before this crisis, you can actually see like Kerala was already at the top in many social and economic indicators, but under them, it just started doing some wonders that nobody even thought was possible. Like it was one of those states that actually built about 2 lakh or 200,000 homes for the homeless. It started raking in profits in its public sector companies
Yeah.
like government companies.
And also the way
that have,
migrant workers have been treated in Kerala.
exactly,
That's another
literacy program.
really, yeah, impressive thing. Like one of the
Yeah.
things that really kind of chokes me up and makes me, proud is when I see the stories coming out of Kerala of migrant workers. They might be from West Bengal, they might be from Bihar, Jharkhand, UP, the states in the north where there's like a lot of very poor people, and they come from like a long history of like illiterate families, right? Or like semi-literate families. And then they come to Kerala, their kids go to Malayalam government schools, and they end up topping the class. They end up doing really, really well. And I think, one generation, right, under a decent socialist government, that's what working class kids in India can actually achieve for themselves. And you then compare that to the way migrant workers are being treated in Delhi right now, where they're being herded out of
Anywhere,
these cities.
pretty
I mean,
much
anywhere
anywhere in
outside
India.
of Kerala, I guess. Yeah. I mean, Kerala doesn't have that. One of the good things about Kerala is that I don't think there is any kind of native chauvinism against foreign migrant workers. Is there? Or maybe there is. I mean,
There
nobody's
is,
perfect,
but
right?
it's
But yeah.
not something that you can be proud of, or you can actually create a politics around. It hasn't
right,
gained
yeah.
that sort of critical mass in Kerala.
Like
There
you
is
can't,
definitely.
yeah, you can't create like, a Kerala version of Shiv Sena or something like that and say, go home, Biharis, Bengalis. I think part of the reason for that is because Malayalis need foreign workers, right? Because they do all the jobs that Malayalis won't do. Because so many Malayalis, like you, like me, we leave Kerala. And of course, the joke in the past used to be that, like this is how the Kerala model actually works. It's purely based on remittances. Is that still true, or does Kerala have a lot of internal economic development going on?
Actually, industrially, Kerala is quite backward, so
Yeah,
it never really picked up. But if you look at, and the remittances are still one of
it's
the
still a
major
remittance.
sources of
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
revenue, but you still have a government that. So that's what I'm saying. Like in the past 4 years that this government has been in power, the left government in Kerala, this one actually tried to bring in a plethora of measures you can think of that actually could, in the right circumstances, considering the national economy and everything, can actually, foment productive growth in the country, in the
Right.
state
Okay.
at least. So, like one of the things that I pointed out was the profit-making PSUs. Like there is now almost no public sector units, what we call as the government-owned companies. Almost none of them are now loss-making. And Kerala and public sector units are just like infamous in India for being one of those loss-making white
Yeah.
elephants.
Right. Right. But the ones in Kerala are solvent. That's pretty good.
Now they are. They were
Yeah.
not before.
Yeah.
So it's like just picked up over the years. And
But I guess like also even the stuff about Kerala relying on remittances is also a product of Kerala's ability to educate its population, which then means that the per capita remittances that the average Malayali sends back home is a lot larger than the per capita remittances that, for example, Indians who work overseas in like menial low paid jobs would send.
yeah, and also we have to understand, like even when we talk about remittances, one of the things that is never talked about is that states like Punjab, states like UP, at one point have created this large migrant population who have gone outside, who have even like Punjabis, for instance. There is a large Punjabi diaspora across the world right now.
Yeah.
And they also send a large remittance back home, and that is one of those major sources of revenue. If you actually look, Kerala and Punjab are quite similar in that sense,
Okay,
except
yeah.
for in terms of agricultural productivity, which Punjab is much better at. But you look at the average social indicators, and Punjab is far behind than Kerala. If you look at it in terms of literacy, in terms of poverty, or even absolute poverty, electrification, all of that, Punjab is far, far behind. It's
Right.
still hasn't come to that, like not even close to any of the southern states levels. And so it's not simply just the remittances that have kept Kerala apart. You need to have dedicated, very committed political leadership, and that is what Kerala has brought up. Like it
Indeed.
created those, and that leadership has actually created the the entire infrastructure that is now doing so well in a time of crisis like this right now. And you can actually not. I actually talk to my family, my relatives back home in Kerala, and you do not hear any kind of panic. You do not hear any kind of like there is concern, of course. Like there are people who are apprehensive about how big the epidemic might get, but they are not really concerned about their immediate needs. They're really not concerned about the fact that they won't be having grains tomorrow or they won't have the salaries tomorrow. That's not a concern that for an average Malayali right now. But here in Delhi, that was something that even kept me awake at night just a week ago, until some of the programs were announced and some of the measures were announced by the government. And so that tells you that committed leadership has a lot to do. Like what kind of people you have in government, what kind of people are going to lead the state right now. All of that changes a lot, actually.
Do you think it's changed perceptions? So do you think there's been a change in perception from among pro-BJP people in the north about Kerala? Are they starting to come around and say, hey, you know what, maybe these communists aren't too bad? Are you seeing that kind of a change?
I should send you this one thing. So, the Republic TV?
Yeah. Arnab Goswami.
Arnab Goswami.
The nation wants to know, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So so for the audience here, Republic TV is like what would happen if Fox News turned fascist, outrightly fascist.
Right.
So that is how terribly terrible that news channel is, terribly right-wing, very pro-BJP. And today they actually put up a debate which had, should India impose Kerala model?
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. So the most right-wing TV channel, because that's more impressive than what I was going to bring up, right? Because I saw Rajdeep Sardesai and he was saying, what Kerala thinks today, India will think tomorrow, and he's like praising Kerala. And I was like, yeah, that's good to see, because I've seen him say a lot of things where I'm like, don't fully agree with you there. I don't know I think he's like a centrist or something like that, right? Or like pro-Congress or something like that. Nothing particularly
Not really pro-Congress, but very centrist kind of person.
Centrist, okay, yeah, not pro-Congress.
He doesn't want to get into the bad books of anybody.
Yeah. And then you've just told me now that Republic TV is discussing the Kerala model. Okay, that's impressive.
When I first came to Delhi and I had joined the South Asian University, and there was I was chatting with this nice fellow who was working as a security guard there.
Okay.
And I said that I was from Kerala and something like that. And like, I will be and then he just, out of the blue, he just started talking about like how good your state is. Like it's like great with how good their hospitals are. I have a cousin there who's working as a daily wage worker, and it's just amazing. Like your people have just like reached the moon.
Yeah. It's a good feeling actually. Like I like it. I'm like, yes, I'm from Kerala. The Cuba of India. Like. You mentioned the CAA, the NRC. My understanding of it is that this is an attempt by the BJP government to dispossess millions and millions of Indians. That's the way I see it, because they're using the language of wanting to stick up for the rights of minorities who have been persecuted in other countries, so that they can get citizenship, in order to ultimately push through an NRC in which the onus is on the Indian citizen to prove that they are citizens of the country. First, they'll go after Dalit Muslims, then they'll escalate the situation, and the ultimate goal, I think, because I have this theory that the BJP is fundamentally a social Darwinist party, the ultimate goal is to make sure that only a minority of India's population are actually citizens and the rest of the population are completely disenfranchised. And it's just like the laws of Manu, like, become the Indian constitution at that point.
Yeah, so one of the key contentions of the whole citizenship amendment bill was that it sets up legal precedent of defining citizenship on the basis of religion, something that India has never done so far. Like you can actually, we have a very complicated citizenship law, you would know. Like even the concept of persons of Indian origin is something very complicated. Like you have to prove your entire ancestry back to 1947 or 1950 to prove yourself as person of Indian origin to get all of that, whatever benefits it comes with. But it never really, or never actually even attempted. There was no government that even attempted to create a legal system whereby, even if it is for persecuted minorities or refugees and asylum seekers from other neighboring countries, it never really tried to create a legal system where you would have your citizenship will be decided by your religion. And you have to understand why it is more important, because we do not have a system where we can actually prove that you belong to a certain religion. Like I cannot prove myself to be a Hindu. I can just claim to be a Hindu or a Muslim. Like that is effectively how it works. It's, unless it's in unless I have to get special benefits as a minority, as a religious minority in a certain state, I'll have to furnish with documents from one of my local religious institution. But apart from that, in most cases, like if a census, if census officials come to your place, you only say that you are so and so. You can actually even not say what your religion is, and it is still fine, because it really doesn't affect anything of how you live in the states, legally speaking, in front of laws and everything. So something like that would now, there is no mechanism for the state to actually ascertain what will be a certain what will be a person's religion. Now that's a very dangerous thing. So it is really not going to help any of the asylum seekers. Their whole point was that there are non-Muslims in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan who are persecuted. So they need, they need this law to gain citizenship in India, so that they can be, fully functioning citizens and not be stateless. Fine, you can just mention that you want to give citizenship to persecuted minorities. That's not really a problem, or anybody persecuted for their religion. But when you put you can only give citizenship to, or fast track citizenship for so and so and so and so religions, like they actually mentioned those for no good reason why they did that. You actually you will have to create a system where you have to verify that. And that is where the problem starts. And as you said, it is going to, when coupled with the National Register of Citizens that they had in Assam, in a very different historical context, but they had it in Assam, which is a state where most of the land is occupied by indigenous people. So you have to create certain kind of protections for them, so that settlers and migrants do not encroach upon their land. So that is an understandable proposition. So you need to create a register for for people settlements and everything, and create a history of that. But when you couple that with, say, something like CAA and take that across the country, what you're doing is effectively saying that everybody now has to furnish proof of their religion. And that will become because there will be people who, like even among Hindus itself, it's going to be very difficult. There will be people who are just considered Hindus by default. They are not really, because they do not follow some of the Abrahamic religions, they're just considered Hindus by law. So how do you then get these people to prove their religion? We do not have any baptismal rite as it is there in, say, Abrahamic religions, unless you're a Brahmin, of course. Where you get that whole sacred thread ceremony. But apart from them, nobody else really has any initiation into this religion.
Well, that's the strange thing about Hinduism, right? And I think there's huge problems with that label to begin with. I mean, for one, it turns a regional identity, which is how the word Hindu is historically used to refer to those people who lived to the east of the Indus River. It turns that into this ideological religious category. And the weird thing is that this category is the only religious affiliation in the world that excludes from its definition, that includes within its definition those who are excluded in practice.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
is the
And
strangest thing. Yeah.
this is also to do with the way colonialism understood Hinduism. So the colonial regime was the one who created this definition of what constitutes a Hindu,
Yeah.
and it was them who actually came up with this, because it was a bureaucratic, it was a way to rationalize several bureaucratic works. If you have 1,000 different faith systems, it will be very difficult to really note that down and work around that, create laws regarding that, and create a legal system in the form of modern bureaucracy to accommodate all of them. And they
I think
really did not want to spend.
it was the attempt to
And
create like an artificial majority. Because you've got like,
I mean, I don't think the British were really concerned about creating a majority or a minority at that point, because even if you look at the pre-independence India, the unpartitioned, undivided India under the British Raj, about more than a third of the population was already Muslim, and you had another 2 or 3% being of other different faith systems. So it was not really and major states like Bengal was mostly non-Muslim. Was mostly Muslim. A majority of them were Muslim, but it was a divided society. Like you had a very diverse, religiously very diverse society, even by the whole definition that they set out. And but the thing is that the project was then taken up by a lot of these Hindu nationalists that came up in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and they made it into a political project to create, as you said, the
artificial majority. Yeah. It's the union of master and slaves, right? It's like, you have oppressed castes that have been excluded from temples for centuries, even millennia, and all of a sudden they're told, you know what, you're Hindu like me, even though I have a long history. My people, my caste, upper castes, have a long history of treating you people like dirt. You're now a Hindu like me. Because, I mean, who's going to be your muscle, right? I mean, you look at the muscle of the BJP, it's like Dalits and OBCs.
Exactly. And that is one of the reasons why it was done. And it begins with the whole, that book with Anand Math in Bengal Renaissance, where you had this parallel current of creating a nationalist ideology that mimicked the way European nationalism was coming about at that point, which was to create a majoritarian as a nation where there is an ethnic majority. And to do that, you need a certain identity, an artificial identity, nevertheless, and exclude the rest. As you know, like much of the 19th century, you had this nation-making process that was quite violent in Europe itself. France itself, which had more than close to a third of its population not speaking French, being excluded and systematically either integrated or just pushed out of the country. So, and that is the place of republic and revolutionary wars and all of that bullshit. But and even then, you had so that is the mimicking of a certain kind of nationalist ideology, and that to a great extent it worked. You have to give it to the Hindu project, because the Hindu project is quite successful. Most people do identify themselves as Hindus, but here's the thing, though: in practice, they do not have a common practice still. A lot of people do have their smaller, their very local indigenous deities that they still worship, their indigenous and localized customs and rituals that are still not seen as something, as part of the Vedic system.
Yeah.
It's just there by default. So
it's like when people refer to Onam as a Hindu festival, it's like, not really. Like, I wouldn't want to call it that.
Exactly. And it's not just Onam, it's a lot of other festivals, like Holi, for instance, that predates the colonial. It is one of those very few so-called Hindu festivals that is seen, that we still practice, and it's being co-opted by the Hindutva project, which were it actually was just a spring festival, and it had very different customs everywhere. Like in some places, you had people playing with colors, and most other places you didn't. And it
So
was
it's like
just
a
like,
seasonal harvest type of festival,
yeah,
right?
most of the
Holi?
festivals,
Yeah.
yeah. No, so
Yeah.
this was Holi was not a seasonal harvest festival. It was a spring festival. It was the coming of spring that was because in north of India, you have to understand the temperatures go down very sharply, right,
Oh, right,
during May.
right. Yep.
So when the spring comes in, it's a time when the seasons change and when you have more scope for agriculture. So of course that is a beginning of something. So to celebrate that, you had different ways of doing it. So like in some places it was not even called holy, for instance, but you had like a diverse range of practices that were not even part of what could have been called the Brahminical system at that point. They actually looked down upon it. And then now it has become like part of this core Hindu of being, part of like a good Hindu. You have to practice these festivals.
Yeah.
It's still not a universalized thing. Like Holi is barely practiced in South. Diwali is almost non-existent in Kerala. You do not have different. You have a different kind of Navaratri being practiced in Bengal, in Gujarat, and in South.
Well,
So
that's
that is
also because Diwali celebrates the killing of, Comrade Mahabali. May Allah be pleased with him. So that's like, yeah, like, so it's obviously Malayalis aren't going to be celebrating a festival that celebrates the killing of Kerala's first communist, right? So
yeah, like it can be that, but there's also the other fact that Diwali is also a very very recent festival, even for much of North India, and it shows the success, as I said, the extent of the success of the
Hindu
Hindu
project,
project.
really the Brahmin project, right?
Yeah,
The Brahminical project.
exactly, and that it is a war of ideology if you look at it. So you did not have entire. So it was Navratri for a very long time. That was this very early modern invention of celebrating the pre-winter autumn kind of period where you have different deities being celebrated in different ways, and from there then you create this whole narrative how okay, after Navratri you have to have Diwali because Ram killed Ravana in Navratri. They just made this shit up in somewhere in the 19th century, and then suddenly Diwali is big. So there might have been places where Diwali was practiced, but it was not like a universal thing. And you can actually see that in Vaishnava texts, where you had, an era of saints in India who were writing poems, and whose literature is one of the hallmark for many of the modern Indian languages in much of North India. And these people did not mention any of these festivals that we today understand. It shows us that these are very modern inventions, and part of this whole Hindu project of creating a narrative that you are a majority, you're a mass, you're a block, an undifferentiated block that is being oppressed by the non-Hindus.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is a very powerful populist, I wouldn't say populist, but a very powerful narrative that has actually worked in the sense that now almost everybody who's considered a Hindu by law is now considers themselves Hindu and really do
Yeah.
not differentiate themselves from their social or their individual and local indigenous practices with the Brahminical system. And that is a disconcerting part. But it's an outcome of nearly a century of work, or more than a century of work, actually.
And
But
this is why I've been interested in Neo Buddhism, because I've been reading EMS Nambudripad.
ah,
So yeah, he talks about how Buddhism was a reaction against Brahmanism, and then eventually Vedanta philosophy emerged as a reaction against Buddhism. But in its day, Buddhism was the populist, proletarian, materialist philosophy of its age.
I'm not sure if does he say proletarian?
He doesn't say proletarian. No, I say proletarian, but he says something. He says something very similar. I was looking through it today, but yeah, It's going to take a while, but yeah, I mean, he essentially was like the oppressed masses.
A very
Yeah.
materialist, very mass. So it was one of those. It can be said like the one of those proper religions, to mass religion, to have ever emerged in India.
Yeah.
If you look at it that way, because and Buddhism and Jainism in that sense, because there's a common identity. At some level, the idea is that everybody is equal, even if it's just their atma or their conscience that is to be considered equal. They're equal at the end of the day.
It's a spiritual democracy, to borrow from Kancha Ilaya.
Exactly, and that sort of spiritual egalitarianism of the spirit was not something that was there in India, especially in the Vedic Brahminical structure and mythologies, because everybody has a place in the social order, and the social order is going to be inherently unequal. And
Brahmanism basically says that if you have a shitty life today, it's because of the sins that you committed in your previous life. Buddhism comes along and says all metaphysical claims are inherently unknowable, and there's no reason for you to believe any of that.
Exactly. So it is quite. So the point has to be that you have to, and even the very idea of, say, like nirvana, which is that you have to get your awakening, your liberation, your spiritual liberation in this life, and you can't just wait for your next life to come. You have to do what you get. You have to get what you do within this life. Is something that is quite progressive, if not really necessarily revolutionary, but it was quite progressive. And it did animate a lot of the masses at that point. And actually look at the way it was practiced, the way pilgrimage came about. All of these are markers of a mass religion. It's not unlike Hinduism, or Brahmanism for that matter. I wouldn't call it Hinduism, but Brahmanism was not a mass religion. It was an ideological apparatus of certain things, and which also corrupted or affected the way Buddhism worked in many ways, because over a period of time, the priests became like the clergy, and unequal society did develop. You had all these extravagant rituals being done where idols were made of gold. All of these are like historically documented, and kings used the clergy to sanctify themselves. All of that happened, but it still remained a mass religion. Its decay, in that sense, helped Brahmanism to flourish, because when you do not have that sort of spiritual democracy, and when it gets co-opted and defeated, ideologically speaking, it just ends up not being, there's no alternate, right, for your spiritual life. There's no alternative. And you're effectively now part of this ideological apparatus that is going to, and that has taken different shapes. You have to understand that Brahmanism also did not remain static. There is a certain tendency among many to think that it has been a system of 5,000 years. That's not true at all. Brahmanism has changed and evolved, much like capitalism. It has evolved and adapted to different material realities to suit itself, and including capitalism. The way it has taken shape in capitalism is how we see caste today. The violence that we see, the caste murders that we see, these are very real. This is the way that Brahmanism has inflicted itself upon the population through violence. That is the way you can sustain within modernity, since capitalism, and that is how you can create dispossession and continue the dispossession that you always had. And that system, that ideological apparatus, has always changed itself in that sense. And the Hindu project, in many ways, is a part of that. But at the same time, you have to also remember that there was a parallel strain of a reformative Hinduism, ones that the likes of the saints that I was talking about, who were in many ways, their legacy was taken up by many. In Kerala, like Sri Narayana Guru.
Narayana Guru, Ayankali,
Ayankali, and in other places as well, you had similar.
Basaveshwara.
Yeah, so he is one of those saints that I'm talking about. So across India, there was this tendency from late antiquity to early modern period, where you had a countering to the ideological apparatus of Brahmanism, by talking down the caste discrimination, by talking down idol worship, by going against the totemic religion that Brahminism was, to is the violence of the caste oppression that was there, and even exclusion of other people, entire tribes altogether.
So thank you, Anish, for being on my show. It was lovely to talk to you. You've got great insights. I read a lot of your work. You're doing great work at People's Dispatch. So keep it up, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.